Hari Om Shri Guru Namaha. Namaste everyone. This will be the 5th episode of Samvadaha, and once again I'm joined by Bede Ji, and we're going to continue our conversation on psychology in the light of Vedanta. So Bede Ji, if you could kick us off.
Okay. Well, one of the most interesting things about Swami Dayananda, or the context of everything he says, is the thing of discovering what does it actually mean to be free while living. So while living our life, what does it actually mean to be free? Now, what he made very clear is that we have what we would call absolute freedom, which is in one sense a long way away from us in the sense of its understanding or knowledge of God in itself. But here we are, we're in the world, as living in the world as an individual, and we're relating to people, we're making a living, we're doing various things. And as an individual, the question is are we free psychologically? And so Swami Dayananda said that we have to be able to appreciate what relative freedom is first before we can even begin to appreciate absolute freedom. Otherwise, it's delusional. And one of the problems in the West when they get hold of the Vedantic thing is they just love to go into this I am consciousness business, or I am God. We have a term in our Western psychology called delusions of grandeur. It's where because of the fundamental problem that Swami Dayananda outlines, we want to be bigger and bigger and better. And in the spiritual field, this is a disaster. There's no humility. It's like, it's terrible. So what I want to talk about is Swami Dayananda's approach to the psychological transformation of the individual and the role that our understanding of God plays in that, because you can't bypass Ishvara or God. A lot of Westerners want to do that because they've got this hang up with religion, but the thing is that there's absolutely no karma yoga without God. Just not possible. And when I say God, I don't mean the Abrahamic understanding of God, because that won't help you do karma yoga. That'll make you too afraid. You know what I mean? So what we'll do is we'll just start from the beginning, and we'll just go through it, and we'll just see. We've got an hour, so we'll see what we can do, and if we have to continue it, we will. All right? Okay. So the thing about Swami Dayananda is that he did not present a theory about God or a theology about God, or he didn't present a psychology for us to study. What he rather did was, through his understanding of the Gita, what he did was he would use words so that we could see our life. So we didn't study the Gita, we studied our lives in the light of the Gita. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Big difference, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So what we do here whenever we read him, which I do often, is that we examine our life in the light of his words, in the light of his teaching. So one of the first things that we're all confronted with, whether we like it or not, is he said that we're confronted with 4 categories of experience. And this is whether we like it or not. It doesn't matter whether we want it to be different. This is just simply the way it is. So at any one time, I'm facing an experience, either an experience I like, more than what I like, less than what I like, or opposite to what I like. This is never going to change. The idea that the functioning universe that we're always facing is going to be devoid of experiences that I like, more than what I like, less than what I like, or opposite to what I like, is completely delusional. So this idea that, well, one day I'm going to have a situation where the only things that's going to happen to me is what I like and more than what I like, and I'm never going to have what I don't like or opposite to what I like, is completely and utterly delusional. Okay, so that's the first thing. So this is the foundation of our life, whether we like it or not, the fabric of our everyday experience. Now, let's just have a look at this question of freedom practically, right? Let's say that you say to me, Bede, I think you're a wonderful human being. And then suddenly I'm feeling a delicious feeling of self-acceptability. I'm feeling a sense of ego inflation. You know what I mean? I'm feeling egoically filled up. Now, when we look at that, that might sound very good, because in our Western culture particularly, we equate ego inflation as happiness, which it's not, but we tend to think of it like that. So not only do I feel good about myself now, I feel also very good about you, right? Now, but the thing is that if when you say something to me, suddenly my way of being in the world is being determined by what you say or do, am I free? Am I free, Prashant?
No.
I'm being determined, aren't I? Mm-hmm. So what's happened is you've said to me, Bede, you're a wonderful human being, and I suddenly become incredibly inflated. But the next week I meet you again and you say, well, Bede, I think you're a bit of an idiot, really. Now suddenly I feel ego deflated. I feel a misery. I feel very unhappy because you've said something I don't like. You've said, in fact, something the opposite to what I like, because I was kind of feeling good about my life and you, because, when I thought of you, I suddenly felt a little bit full of myself. And because it was so delicious, I wanted to hold on to that feeling. And then the next week you come along and you say something that the opposite, and then I suddenly am thrown down. Now, you see how what happens is there's a chopping and changing here, isn't there?
Yes.
There's no sameness, is there? So one moment I'm feeling elated and feeling as if I'm a magnificent human being, and the next moment I'm feeling like a low-life nothing. But, and notice that my experience is that you have made me happy, or you have made me unhappy. Isn't that extraordinary?
Right.
Now, so here I am, I'm facing this world, and it seems to be making me happy or making me unhappy. Mm-hmm. Now, is this free? Is this being free?
No, because you're being tossed and turned by the circumstances.
That's exactly right. And this is one of the reasons why Dr. Freud thought that human beings, our psychology, or the way we are, is totally determined.
So can I ask a question over here? So
yep.
When somebody compliments a person,
yep,
or they may reject the person, how are you how are you relating validation and invalidation with ego inflation and otherwise?
Okay, now there's a difference between now we're not talking about someone can say something, something that I really like you or whatever. Now the thing is that you can appreciate and like that. You don't suddenly have an inflated idea of yourself. Let's say, for example, I'm playing tennis and I do a good shot. It's a satisfying thing to do a good shot. Is that true?
It is.
But if I suddenly move into what Swami Dayananda calls self-objectification, I'm a magnificent human being and I'm superior to others because I can do this good shot, then the self-objectification is not real.
Okay.
It's delusional. Like, for example, if you say to me, Bede, like, I appreciate your friendship or whatever, and it's a very pleasant experience, that is not, there's no self-objectification there necessarily. There might be, right? Because we do have binding desires, but we'll go into that in a minute. But the fact of the matter is that if there's no self-objectification, there's just the experience of something. You are alive to what is being said, you appreciate it, but there's no delusion going on.
Right.
Okay, so for Swami Dayananda, two notions about myself, positive or negative, are actually delusional. Any notion I have of myself is actually delusional.
Right.
But when I see things and things, I'm aware of what's happening. So for him, he was asked a very interesting question. Someone said to him, Swamiji, what is the meaning of life? And he said, well, the meaning of life is to live, obviously. He said, what do they mean by the meaning of life? He says, you're only living when you're alive to facts. Right? So, for example, you say to me, Bede, I think you're a nice guy. And I go, well, thank you very much. I'm alive to the fact. I'm alive to the fact that it's pleasant. But I haven't gone into self-objectification, have I, necessarily?
No.
But I might. If I've got a craving to be, if I've got what they call a binding desire to be liked and admired, and you say something nice to me, I would say that I would suddenly pop into this.
Right.
Okay? So here we are, we're always facing experiences, and we can see that and often we feel the experiences are determining us. Is that true?
Yes.
So when people say, they really made me angry, have you ever had that experience where you feel that something is making you angry?
Mm-hmm.
Now, Swami Dayananda would actually say that's delusional, actually. The idea that I'm being made angry is delusional. Not the fact that I'm angry, that's the fact. I've got to be alive to that.
Okay.
But for him, the whole point of objectivity was to be alive to what is. To be alive to what is. And he basically, if I'm not alive to the living presence of the given as it presents, I'm not living as far as he's concerned.
Right.
Now, but this is an extraordinary thing. If this is true, it means that I'm not living most of the time, in the sense that he means it. I'm dramatizing. I'm dramatizing self-objectification. And my whole psychological life is ego inflation to various degrees and ego deflation.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now, there's a problem here. Is that in our culture, the tendency or the prevailing think is that happiness is ego inflation.
Mm-hmm.
It's feeling good about myself. Have you heard of this obsession people have got about, have you heard the phrase, I want to feel good about myself?
Yes, it's a pandemic in the US. It's
a pandemic. Yeah, and it's also the whole psychology of self-esteem, which I think sucks.
Yes.
It's the idea that because when I'm feeling ego inflated, I anesthetize the opposite, ego deflated. That's why it's so attractive. Okay, so I'm taking happiness to be a transient psychological state.
Right.
Okay, and also the thing is that when I'm feeling good about myself, I'm not really feeling good about myself. I'm taking myself to be an idea.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a lovable person because Prashant has found me acceptable. And then I'm taking myself to be that idea.
Yes.
In other words, I'm looking at a snake. I'm involved entirely in subjectivity. Now, Swami Dayananda says another very interesting thing. If we don't understand that we have the problem that we suffer from the problem or the disease that Vedanta cures, will I desire it? I'm willing to acknowledge that I suffer the disease that Vedanta is designed to cure, is the healing or the solution available to me?
Yes.
It's not, isn't it? It's not available to me unless I acknowledge the fact that yes, I have the disease that he talks about.
Right, you acknowledge the fact, yes.
Yeah, okay, so, and what he's saying is that we, normally speaking, are not free.
Mm-hmm.
He says that we live a life of an emotional yo-yo. So we're looking at those categories of experience, and we go high and we go low, and we're just tossed around like a billiard ball.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes very, very important, doesn't it, to be able to, that's interesting. Well, how is it? What do I need to do? What is necessary for me to be able to remain the same in the face of these changing experiences? Because if I can't remain the same, if I don't understand what it means to remain the same in the face of these experiences act like a puppet master.
Right.
And they'll be continually determining me. And if they're continually determining me, what happens to this whole idea of being free while living?
Yes.
Okay? It's not possible. Okay? Now, he has a very, very elegant solution to this. Okay? Now, but it's not an elegant solution if I'm obsessed about the fact that I'm obsessed about feeling good about myself. If I feel that, then as far as I'm concerned, I'll be wanting to feel good about myself. I'll be taking this to be happy. I'll be taking this to be where happiness is. And I'm going to dedicate my life to trying to feel good about myself. In other words, I will be greedy for certain experiences where I can have the feeling that a feeling of myself, an experience of myself that I like. Would that be true?
That would be true, yes.
But that's completely misdirected. There's no happiness in egoic experience. There's just an egoic experience. Now, I'm not saying that an egoic experience is delicious. Of course it is. I mean, if it wasn't delicious, people wouldn't pursue it. And we have to acknowledge, okay, there's many aspects of me that I love. I get caught up in egoism. I get caught up in ego. I get caught up in this pursuit of trying to find happiness through ego satisfaction. But through the grace of the teaching, we are taught that this is not happiness. This is delusion. Okay, this is delusion. So the whole question is, okay, so here I am, I'm caught. First of all, what I'm pursuing isn't happiness, pursuing it in the wrong place. So where do I find happiness? Like, what's the basis of happiness? Okay, now he's got a very interesting thing on this. As far as he's concerned, us human beings are enclosed in ourselves. We're full of ourselves. He calls this subjectivity. He calls it, like we're just completely full of ourselves. We're not full of reality. We're not full of reality. We're cut off from the presence of reality. Now, this is where there's a very interesting, or this is where, unless we come to understand God in the sense that Swami Dayananda means it, we will never know what freedom means in a relative way. So can we just examine this understanding of God?
Yes, we should.
Okay. Now, because I was a Westerner, I had weird and wonderful understandings of God. And a lot of unhelpful understandings, by the way, like in the sense that with Christian theology, God tends to be like an externalized parent in the sky who either is very angry at you, do you know what I mean, and wants to punish the hell out of you, or will reward you when you're being good. So there was nothing that you could abide. There was an ambivalence in it. There was an ambivalence. Now, what I found very interesting when I watched people in the temples in India, right? When I was a kid, we were in church. I'd be scared. They would scare the hell out of me. You wouldn't dare move. You'd be, you had to sit still and be afraid. But what I saw in India, the kids were completely relaxed at temple. They were just, now, and also what the parents did, and there wasn't just a few of them. They would just, with their hands, would guide them. If they were just being a little bit loud, they just take them and they wouldn't give them this terrible look as if they'd committed a terrible sin. So there was so in Hindu worship, there was no fear.
Right.
They weren't afraid of God. Do you know what I mean? There was just no fear. And so it was a wonderful thing to see, right? Now, the thing is that Swami Dayananda without understanding the universe through his eyes, you can't understand what he means by God. And so what happened was he said a very interesting thing. He said, the starting point of Vedanta is the understanding that God is the material cause of the universe. Isn't that interesting? An amazing thing. Now, what he would do was that he would hold up this pot, this clay pot. And what he would say was that when you're looking at a clay pot, you're not looking at a pot, you're looking at the presence of clay in the form of a pot. So you're not looking at a pot as if the pot has its own being. You're looking at the presence of clay in the form of a pot. And then he went on further to say that when we're looking at this universe, this presence of reality, we're always looking at the presence of reality in various forms. The presence of reality in various forms. And now, just like the pot doesn't have its own being. The pot is completely dependent on its existence for the clay because the pot is clay. Not has clay, but is clay. And not only that, the pot is pervaded by clay. Now, then he did this sleight of hand. He would then say, now when we're looking at the world, right now I'm looking at a computer, I'm looking at the presence of reality in the form of books, in the form of a TV screen, in the form of your, so I'm always facing the presence of reality in a particular form. Would that be true?
Yeah, yes.
Now, this presence of reality, of course, takes different forms. Forms that I like, more than what I like, less than what I like, and opposite. That's not going to change. And he had no problem with it. There's nothing wrong with, you can't help but like, and that's not the problem. But there's a very interesting thing. When I'm caught up in myself, when people come for counseling, or often they're completely and utterly caught up in themselves, in the sense that they're caught up in thoughts and feelings. They're caught up in thoughts and feelings. And it doesn't help in being our Western culture, because our Western culture is obsessed with our thoughts and feelings, what's happening on inside us. Okay, now I remember once, and I didn't understand the meaning of this. I was very, very upset. I'd broken up with a girl. I was about 22 years old, and I was just completely, caught in myself, and I was completely, the misery was extensive. Every aspect of me was unhappy. And I got into an airplane, and what happened was the airplane suddenly broke through the clouds, and this beautiful sunlight came along and stuff like this. And what happened was, I was suddenly filled with the presence of reality in the form of clouds and beauty. Right? And suddenly I was actually literally lifted out of myself. And I was filled with the presence of the given.
Yes.
Now, I didn't understand what that meant then, because I hadn't met Swami Dayananda. I didn't know about this, right? But I didn't understand that the very presence of the given was therapeutic in itself. He says that Ishvara is the best therapist.
Yes.
But the thing was that when I was filled with the presence of God, or the presence of reality, I completely disappeared as this suffering, struggling, unhappy person. It was as if a mirage had disappeared. Now, if I was in actual fact that psychological entity that I was experiencing myself to be, like a miserable, unloved, lonely person, if that was my reality, could never be suspended, could it? But it wasn't interesting that because I came into relationship with the presence of the given, and the presence of the given filled me up, a change happened in me as an individual. A change happened in me as an individual. Now, the thing is that, and that was when I was 22, but I didn't see now, Swami Dayananda had a very interesting saying, he'd always say, and he'd say, see the meaning. Well, I had the experience, but I didn't see the meaning.
How long did that stay with you?
Sorry?
How long did the experience of objectivity stay with you after that moment?
Oh, not very long. It was outstanding as a memory, but no, because fundamentally I was too involved with myself and I didn't see the meaning, right? Because with most of these religions, they don't have this see the meaning business, where someone who actually sees the meaning unfolds the meaning so you can see it too, which was what Swami Dayananda would do. Okay? So anyway, so we have a situation here is that we have two things. We have what he calls being caught up in ourselves, full of ourselves. And he calls this living in our world. Have you heard him make this a thing? You heard him talk about this?
Not this statement, but I see where he's coming from.
Yeah, they've got two Sanskrit terms. I don't know whether Ishvara Visti or something like
Jiva Shushti.
Jiva Shushti and okay. I'm sorry, but I'm not good with that. So caught up in our own world, right? So when I was in that aeroplane, I was suffering psychologically, but the meaning of my experience wasn't my experience. Now, this is the interesting thing. I took it that my experience of suffering was the problem. But Swami Dayananda would say, no. The problem is that you are caught up in your own world. There is an absence of reality. There is an absence of the presence of the given. You are not alive to facts. You are in a world completely, he calls it a bubble, actually. In the book, beautiful book called something about sadness, Freedom from Sadness. Did you ever read Freedom from Sadness?
I think I might have it, yes.
Okay, so magnificent book. But so here I was caught up in myself, right? So I wasn't suffering from psychological problems. I was suffering from an absence of the appreciation of the presence of reality. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. The presence of the given. Okay? Now, this is a most extraordinary thing, that for him, the presence of God, or the presence of being, because for Swami Dayananda, being itself is God. Mm-hmm. Being itself is God. And there is not any experience I'm having that is away from the presence of being. In fact, everything I'm looking at is the presence of being. Now, this does not mean that God has become war. He made it. He solved this problem too, the so-called problem of evil. What he's saying is that this world that we're living in, no form that you're looking at has its own being. Mm-hmm. It's all dependent to have any existence whatsoever. It's dependent upon the presence of reality. Okay, so it's not, but it's not saying that God becomes war. It's just saying that for anything to exist, the contraries of human experience in this world of samsara, nothing can happen without nothing can be. Nothing has its own be. It's an appearance that's dependent upon the presence of reality. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, now it gets very interesting here, because unlike you Hindus, we Westerners have this thing about, well, how do we find God? Where do we find God? What one day, and you see, before I met Swami Dayananda, I had this idea that one day in the future, maybe I was going to find God. Mm-hmm. Okay, or maybe I had to do something to find God. I had to, pray. Or I had to engage in a journey across time. From here or here. But no, you see, when it comes to Swami Dayananda, basically, where is the place do we discover the presence of God? Knowing full well that when we are abiding in the appreciation of the presence of reality, we're lifted out of ourselves.
Right.
Well, there's only one place. The presence of God is available right here, right now, as I am. Now, this is the amazing thing. As I am. Now, this is extraordinary. Like, this is, and we don't have anything like this in the West, right? Because we've got God and then creation separate, you see.
Right.
You mean? Now, so what happens is that this is of profound psychological consequence, because instead of trying to go for a journey into the future to discover God, the only thing, you see, can I create the presence of God, Prashant? Can I create the presence of God?
No, you can only discover it.
I can only recognize the presence of God and abide in that appreciation, can't I?
Yes.
I can't do God. You know, because he has another wonderful saying, everything is given. He didn't say some things are given. And the thing with Dayananda, eventually you take him literally. You know, everything is given. So, and not only that, the presence of the given is the presence of the giver.
Yes, very beautiful.
That's wild. That's wild. Now, but this changes your whole understanding, because this is the Vedic vision of God. No one has this. The Buddhists, for example, have this idea, it seems to be, and particularly now in the West, you know, all this you've heard of all this mindfulness business?
Oh, yes.
You know,
It's completely.
so the idea is that you can do reality. You know, if I practice mindfulness, something's going to happen, and then I'm going to get the result. Do you know what I mean? Now, Vedanta is different than that, because for Swami Dayananda, the whole point is being awake to the moment by being yourself. But here's the thing. This is where it's only when we are abiding in the appreciation of the presence of God do we find what it means to be ourselves. We cannot, you don't discover yourself as a separate entity, as a wonderful, pristine, you know, like, you know, the perverted Vedantic notions, like I am wonderful consciousness and I'm pristine and clear and beautiful and all this nonsense. The only self-acceptance, the only way we can find ourselves acceptable is when we are rooted in what he calls Ishvara, or in God, or in the presence of reality. That's the basis of being acceptable. In fact, he said a wonderful thing. He said, when you are accepting what is, the presence of the given, whatever that is, even unpleasant things, because we have to, when he says, only then do you find yourself acceptable.
Right.
Because normally what happens is human psychology is resistance, fighting, constantly fighting. So in the face of these 4 categories of experience, it's fighting. Even ego inflation is a resistance against the opposite.
Yes.
Whole psychology is built on resistance. But he says a very interesting thing. You know how we can get into various modes of being in the world when we're cut off from reality?
Yeah.
Anger, fear, loneliness, emptiness. Yeah. Various, all of the so-called psychological states, in terms of Swami Dayananda's psychology, is all different forms of subjectivity.
True.
So the meaning of our suffering is not our psychological states. The meaning of our suffering is that we have fallen away from the appreciation of the presence of God.
Yes.
It's not a psychological problem. It's a religious problem, actually. It's a reality problem. Does that make sense? It has a profound psychological, and no one talks like this.
So
Even any book I've read, no one. Good.
So you would say that the psychological problems are downstream from this ontological misunderstanding.
The epistemological problem of not seeing reality, the natural consequence is pain.
Okay. Yeah.
In our Western scriptures, we have the example of the vine and the branches. If you're cut off from reality, you can't help but be miserable.
Right.
That's given. It's not that, and this was a great thing for me to discover. He gave a talk for about 3 weeks, and I've never had the feeling that I'm stuffed up psychologically since.
Was this during 2010?
I used to think that I was mucked up psychologically. There was something wrong inside me, that I had psychological problems. And he gave this talk about alienation from reality for about three weeks. And from that point on, because I went up and saw him, I said to him, you don't see pathology, do you? He said, no, there's only order.
Oh, yeah.
So given that I'm cut off from reality, of course I'm going to be miserable. If I put my hand on the stove, I'm going to get burnt. It's not, but the difference is, it's not God's wrath. It's not God's punishment. It's very punishing not to be cut off from God. But there's none of that nonsense, which is a blight of Western thinking. Okay, so he has this thing. All right, so right here, right now, as I am. Now, how good is this? Have you ever sometimes been with yourself as you are and you're unhappy with the way you are?
Yeah, quite.
Yeah, now this is the wonderful thing. He says the understanding of Ishvara is the basis of self-acceptance.
Right.
Now, what happens is, have you ever been in conflict with yourself? I hate being what I'm like.
Yeah.
It's in conflict with you. He calls this self-dissatisfaction. I hate being what I'm like. Right? Now, but with this understanding of God, you're liberated from this, I hate being what I'm like. Because when the knowledge, and we can forget this knowledge, there's no doubt about the fact that we can forget it, but when we come back to it, we go, okay, right here, right now, as I am, is the very presence of God. And I can abide in the appreciation of it. Now, it's a very interesting thing when you do this. Because, so this vision that you see, this is a vision he unfolds. It's not a theory. It's, in other words, it's a way of seeing in which you can live. You can abide in this way of seeing. He calls this living the vision. You see, he's different from the Buddhists. He says, first of all, we need the recognition, and then we need to live the recognition. He doesn't say we need the recognition, then we have to practice it. There's a difference. Because this vision is given. Now, why is vision so important psychologically? Well, let's say that I'm angry at you, Prashant. I'm very angry at you. So I'm engaged in a way of seeing, aren't I? I think that you're an SOB. Now, that way of seeing is based on my psychological reactions. Is that true? I've become my thinking, and my thinking has become me, as Swami Dayananda puts it. Okay? So my way of seeing is my way of being, isn't it?
Yes.
Now this is why Vedanta works. Your way of seeing is your way of being. So and he says a beautiful thing. So, and this angry attitude I've got, right, is an attitude. Now, I asked him when I first went to India, I was very interested because I wasn't getting it. I went and saw him. I said, look, what do you mean by attitude? You know, like in the West, we think of attitude as thoughts and stuff. He said, very interesting. He says, attitude is the individual. It pervades the individual. So it's not something inside my head. So when I'm angry at you, every aspect of my being is involved in that anger, isn't it? My tone of voice, the way I'm seeing you, the reactions I'm having. It's a complete bundle, isn't it?
Yes.
Now, and normally speaking, us human beings, we're enclosed in attitudes that have been caused by our psychological past. Does that make sense? The content of our psychological content is determining the attitude that's popping up. A friendly attitude, an angry attitude, a sad attitude, an empty attitude, whatever it is that we happen. Yeah. Can you imagine this? Can you imagine one attitude that frees us from all of those attitudes? One attitude which all of these psychological attitudes gets resolved into. Would that be good to know about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, he clarified that. Now. So, are we all tracking so far, Prashant?
Oh, yeah. We can do for 30 minutes. That's fine.
Okay. So what happens is, so he says a very interesting thing. He says, in the formal teaching of Vedanta, they have a thing, and it's very, very important. It's called graceful acceptance. Now, he says that this is an attitude born out of the understanding of Ishvara. So it's not an attitude that I do. I'm now going to be gracefully accepting. I'm going to accept. It is not a result of my psychophysical functions, of me deciding with my will. It is actually a discovery of a way of being in the world, which is a way of seeing, because it's a way of seeing, which is a way of being. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Just like me seeing you as an SOB is a way of being, isn't it? Anger, yeah. Right? But the difference is, this way of seeing and being is not born out of my psychological past. This way of being, what he calls graceful acceptance, or a term I prefer, which is being relaxed in the lap of Ishvara, is born out of the understanding of what God is.
Yes.
Of what God is. Now, don't worry about the fact that we can lose sight of this vision. He has another understanding, is that once he's opened our eyes to this, he has a thing called highlighting. Now, I found this very interesting because I loved his psychological gems. I just loved his psychology. Highlighting is, let's say you're messed up and you're a bit angry and all of this sort of stuff, and then suddenly, through the grace of the teaching, it comes to you that you've been lost. Do you know what I mean? What happens is the presence of God comes into your life and goes, you're a bit lost now. And the understanding of the teaching, because God becomes present in our life as understanding, which we got from the guru kind of thing, right? So what happens is it comes in and goes, you're caught up. Okay. Now, so then what you can do is what he calls highlighting. What you do is you then bring to mind the words of the teaching. And you're not bringing to mind a theory, you're bringing to mind a vision. He said that contemplation is seeing reality, is seeing what was revealed to you in the teaching without thinking. Now, is that good or is that good? It's a vision.
That's beautiful.
Vision. Yeah. Now, so here you go, wait a minute. So here I am. Where do I find God? Right here, right now as I am. Now, this is a wonderful thing, because let's say that I'm feeling miserable. Let's say I've had a fight with my wife. Who's ever had a fight with their spouse? Everybody who's listening has had a fight with their spouse. We all fight. Human beings fight. Let's get over. We do suffer from the disease that he's talking about. Okay, so now when I'm suddenly upset inside, right? What happens is, first of all, the natural reaction. Remember, he says the first reaction is you, and the second reaction is ego, is Ishvara. So the first reaction is you. It's her. Right now. So what I'm objecting to isn't what my wife or spouse has said and done. I'm objecting to this terribly unpleasant experience of myself, what he calls self-dissatisfaction and fear. And we know it's fear because I'm desperately trying to change my wife so I can get rid of it again.
Right.
So I'm trying to deal with it externally so that I can feel good in the inside. All right? Now, or I might even not do that. Let's say I go, okay, no, it's me, it's the fault. Then I try and fix myself. Do you notice, see how there's dualism both ways? There's a dualism between me and my wife. I'm struggling with her. Friction, right? And remember, he said the basis of reaction is non-acceptance of a fact. That's a psychological principle. So I'm either trying to change her so I can change me, or I'm trying to change me, which is another dualism, isn't it?
Yes.
The part that's suffering and the part that's struggling with the suffering. And I was before I went to India, that was a thing that I was always caught in, particularly that one. Now, but here, because we understand the teaching, so here I am, I'm just upset. Do you know what I mean? Now, but because through the grace of the teaching, because he made something very clear, the location of the problem is you, and the solution is you. The location is you, and the location of the solution is you. Now here I was, just a few minutes before, I was caught in the delusion that the location of my problem was my spouse.
Yeah.
But now, this is a profound teaching. This is profound. So here I am, I come back, and the fact is I'm upset and I'm angry and I'm frustrated. Well, what do? Do I deny it? No, because you see, I'm not gonna I'll now become mindful and try and look at it to get rid of it. No. What he says is the whole point is to be alive to the facts. It's not the facts that are constantly changing. What I need to do is to be alive to facts, whatever those facts are. So what's the fact when I'm upset and angry? That's the fact. Right? Now, remaining the same is remaining with the fact. Remaining with the fact. The only thing, when I'm alive to facts, that's what makes me remain the same. But what I'm alive to is going to be constantly changing. So here I am, I'm like this, and I go, okay. Now, the great thing is this. You can come, you see, with this Vedic vision of God, you can come to God exactly as you are. You can just come in and go, here you are. So you can come to Ishvara exactly as you are, and you can place yourself as you are in Ishvara's lap. You can. This is the great thing. So here I am, I'm like this, and I know that if I try and depend upon myself, I'm going to get into trouble. So if I try and change myself, rationalize it, think it out, try and analyze it, well, that's gone. If I try to move away from it, I'm resisting it. So that's not whatever. The only thing I've got is that because I understand that the presence of God or the presence of reality is right here, right now, I remain with that. So I remain with God without friction. Without friction. This is what they call grace. So here I am, I'm like this. And what I do is I just simply come to God as I am. I'm upset. And then I just wait. I wait, because if I remain with myself without friction, the lights turn on. I come alive to what is. But this coming alive to what is, remember what? It's the presence of reality coming into my life, isn't it? That's what makes me alive to facts and conscious or aware is being filled with the presence of the given. So I remain with myself, and then it unravels. I get unraveled, and I get literally drawn back into the lap of Ishvara. And I come to what he calls being relaxed in the lap of Ishvara. Does that make sense? Yes. Now, I can't do this without an understanding of God. If I don't know that, if I don't understand the Vedic vision of God, forget it. Forget it. All I can do is this. Now, so, and this is something that is available to us always is to be able to be what he calls relaxed in the lap of Ishvara. And I want to just explain what the three elements that we have here that we can, because this has got nothing to do with belief. This is just the way it works. So the first thing is, here I am, I'm like this, and I remain with myself. By remaining with myself, suddenly what happens is I start to become saturated with a sense of composure. Okay? I don't know why, so what happens is, and this composure, you know how with every psychological reaction there's resistance, what he calls the fighter in you?
Yes.
Well, he says the fighter in you disappears. So what happens is there's a sense of composure. It's not,
Is that what he means when he refers to the ninja stance?
Sorry?
Is that what Swamiji means when he says people take up the ninja stance?
The ninja stance, yes, that's the opposite of composure. That's you as a fighter. But when you remain with Ishvara as he is, you remain with yourself as you are, you place yourself in Ishvara's hands, because it's the presence of Ishvara appreciated that's the transformative factor, not what you do. No one likes this, people, because this means that we have to depend upon God, you see. People like to do the spiritual climbing thing. It doesn't work. It's just more ego. So what happens is, so first of all, there's a sense of composure. And this composure is given. It's born out of the understanding or appreciation of the presence of God. Does that make sense? So as the presence of the given fills you up, you become composed. Doesn't mean to say you like what's happening. There's no need. He's not talking about likes and dislikes. He's just composure. The second thing is, and this is a remarkable thing. If you, let's say, for example, you're in an argument with your spouse and suddenly you go, and you remember. or you could say Ishvara reminds you, because it's the light of the teaching that comes in. Because for Swami Dayananda, knowledge is a dynamic presence in your life. It governs you. So suddenly what happens is, here I am, I go, I'm caught up in resistance. I've lost sight of God. It comes in. And that knowledge governs you.
Yes.
You see what I mean? It's not, so that's why it's not a theory. It's not a theory I'm applying. Right? Now, the second thing is, whereas a moment before you were being determined by what your wife said or did, or your spouse said or did, now you are actually psychologically being free, because you're not being determined. You might still be facing an experience that's the opposite to what you like, but it's no longer determining you. So you see how you're being free?
Yes.
So being composed, being free. And now the clincher. This is the clincher. You also find yourself being at home with yourself. Now you cannot, and Swami Dayananda was emphatic on this, you can't be at home with yourself unless you're home in God. It's not possible.
Can I ask a question? So between being free and being at home with yourself, how do you differentiate those two?
Well, they're the same. Each one is the same. When you're composed, you're being free, and you're being at home with yourself when you're being at home. Because this is what he means by this. Formally, they call it graceful acceptance.
Right.
Because when you're at home with yourself, you know how his whole psychology is that every psychological pain you have, he covers with the term self-dissatisfaction.
Yes.
So every form of psychological suffering is, I hate being what I'm like. So, and in the West, we have all these different categories, and then we've got different therapies to deal with each one and stuff. Well, he doesn't bother with that. What happens is, if I'm right here, right now, as I am, at home with myself, what happens to all the forms of self-dissatisfaction?
They disappear.
They're not there. In the vision, they are resolved. Now, this is not the absolute vision, but by goodness, you can't bypass this. It's ridiculous. You see, this whole idea that you can, particularly in the West, they try and do it without God. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous, because the thing is that, notice how it's only by me being filled with the presence of Ishvara do I have psychological freedom. Otherwise, I'm completely enclosed in myself. Now, once I understand what it is to rest in the lap of Ishvara, or understand this graceful acceptance, have you ever heard the expression, yoga is sameness?
Yeah, Samattam Yoga Uchyate is.
Is sameness. How can you remain the same unless you know what God is, in the sense that he means it?
Right.
How do you do that? It's just not possible. And it's a perversion of the teaching to try and get rid of without the Vedic understanding of God, and there's no other teaching that has this, by the way. I've never found one in my entire life.
Yeah.
So without that, there is no psychological change. So my practice is this. Once I become familiar with what it means to be relaxed in the lap of Ishvara, which means to be alive to facts, which means to be composed, which means to be psychologically free, and which means to be at home with myself, because I'm confronting those 4 categories of experience all the time, I notice suddenly that I fall away from them. Now, I don't get guilty about that, because even the light of Ishvara shows me, Bede, you've fallen away, come back. So it's no longer, there's no guilt here or anything. What happens is you practice living the vision. So see, the Vedic vision of God is a vision you live, and it transforms you psychologically, because what happens is you notice that you suddenly fall away, and then you suddenly come back to the lap. And how do you do that? You stop the fighting, you stop the antagonism, you remain as you are. It's a completely honest act. Now, I remember once when I went to see him and I was confused. I said, now, you said to me that about bring your mind to yourself and think of another thing and all of this sort of stuff. And then he just looked at me. And I remember, by the way, he was short. I mean, he didn't seem short. He seemed big in my mind, but actually he was small. But he looked at me and he goes, just be your simple, naked self.
Wow.
And I went, and then he turned away. He turned away from me. And I went back to my room. My tail between my legs, and I sat down. And you see, I never knew really that God was not away from the ordinary. I had a kind of a disdain for the ordinary, because I was an intellectual and I was full of myself and my theoretical idea. But here I was just in my room with myself, sitting ordinary person. So I just remained with this the presence of the ordinary. And the thing was, it all suddenly clicked.
Right. That
God was not away from any aspect of my experience. I can never get away from him. It was such a wonderful thing to know that I was always embraced by the presence of God. And my only problem was my cognition of it. Do you see what I mean? I might forget it, but it's such an extraordinary vision, this. And why it's transforming is that, have we got time to go into why it's transforming?
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
Okay, so before I go on, so what just in terms of what we've been talking about, what for you, what I've been talking about, what stands out for you? What stands out?
That this vision is really the greatest closure that you can have, because any other form of psychological therapy would give you closure with regards to a particular issue. But this gives you closure to the problem of life itself, and it's fantastic.
Yes, but in actual fact, no, psychotherapy normally doesn't actually. What it does, unfortunately, what happens is, in terms of functional living, it can do. If the therapist is realistic in terms of functional living and getting people to examine their conduct and their consequences.
Right.
But it cannot even touch the fundamental problem of fear. And you see, the reason that you feel composed is you're lifted out of fear. That's why, because fear is our constant companion. I don't care what anyone says. And also, it lifts us out of self-dissatisfaction, which he says the two, fear and self-dissatisfaction, is our fundamental problem. When I heard this, I went, that's me.
Right.
So now he has a very, now he says a very interesting thing about the whole purpose and meaning of karma yoga, right? And it's necessary for us to understand it, otherwise we won't really know what we're doing. He said the karma yoga does two things. It brings about the discovery of a contemplative disposition.
Yeah. And
it neutralizes binding desires. Now this is very, like psychologically, you see, what I liked about Dayananda's understanding, he said that the psychology of the Gita is the psychology of desire. And I knew that I was moved by emotions. You know, I knew that, I knew the cognitive psychologists that say, it's thinking that determines everything. No. I knew I was moved. So now, so let's imagine, and we'll just use a metaphor, one thing as an example of a binding desire, but realize that we have many examples. Let's say that I have let's say take a common one, the need to be liked and admired.
Right.
Right? Now, so what happens is, let's look at the structure. He talks about a binding desire. In other words, you're bound by it. You're actually literally tied up, you're bound by it, right? So, but in the West, we would say, okay, that's a compulsion. We try and fix the compulsion. He didn't bother about that. No, because the binding desire is, if I was composed and at home with myself, would I have the desire to be liked and admired? Would I need the experience in order to fortify myself?
No, you'd
to defend myself?
You would be.
No. Yeah. Now, our whole life is built up, normal human life is built up as a defense against what he calls the fundamental problem, fear and self-dissatisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
So here I am. So what I've got is, in order to be liked and admired, I'll have my little bragging routines all with it. Because the thing is about bragging, putting yourself forward, you've got to make sure that it's socially acceptable, so it's got to be subtle.
Right.
You mean? Because if it's not subtle, so what happens, we learn how to promote ourselves, so to look good, right? Now, the problem is, though, because it's a binding desire, now the Gita, now this is where Dayananda was brilliant psychologically. He says, with the Gita, we're not interested in desires. He says you can have it's a privilege to have desires. Mm-hmm. He wasn't one of these Indians that says desires are bad. We need desires. But the target of what he was talking about in Karma Yoga is binding desires. Not desire to associate with friends, desire to make money. No. Binding desires. And he says a binding desire is a desire which, when frustrated, you become disturbed.
Right.
Right? So you may not know what your binding desires are, but every day you're getting lessons about that. Ishvara is giving you lessons every day about that, right? Mm-hmm. So here I am. I come to you and I do my little bragging routine, but I find that you're not responding. Mm-hmm. Now, if you respond, I'll feel a sense of satisfaction, won't I? I'll be protected against the self-dissatisfaction and fear.
Yes.
But if you don't, now this is the wonderful thing. With the life of Karma Yoga, we're going to now use our daily life to expose the fundamental problem, mm-hmm. to be able to resolve what he calls resolve it into Ishvara.
Yes.
This is a wonderful thing. This is an opportunity. So what happens is you say something I don't like, and suddenly I'm thrown back into the feelings of inferiority and as if I'm nothing and unimportant or whatever it is that I like. Now, what can I do? I can either try and change you, or I can brag to someone else, which is what normally happens. Or because I understand the necessity of neutralizing the binding desire, I, without any form of denial. Now, denial is a big thing. People are so afraid of this fundamental problem that Swami Dayananda points out, they're even afraid to acknowledge it. Right. Like they're afraid to go, okay, the basis of my life as a human being is this fundamental fear and self-dissatisfaction. And out of this come all the intensity of the binding desires, because the binding desires are a cure for it. Mm-hmm. Right? So when we're going the opposite way, we're going to go, okay, I'm going to become very sensitive to whenever this fear and self-dissatisfaction comes up, I'm going to resolve it into Ishvara. I'm not going to try and change the world or trying to change other people. Okay. So here I am, I'm thrown back in this, and again what I do is I resolve it in Ishvara. I remain with it because of the understanding. Now what happens is, so here I was just a moment before I was trying to get you to like me. Mm-hmm. You didn't like me. Now here I am, I'm here with myself, I'm remaining with myself, and I'm with that feeling of, feeling inferior and not being good enough and all of this stuff, which is quite normal, by the way. It's universally denied because people are afraid of it, because in our culture now it's obsessed with heroism. You notice that? Being an outstanding person, a hero, and all of this, being your own person and finding your passion and
yes.
Anyway, Anyway, but so what happens is I have this opportunity, don't I? Now that I have this opportunity, that now there has been a revelation. In other words, I'm willing to expose myself to the fact that I have this problem, and I'm going to come to Ishvara in all honesty, without denial. I'm not. Isn't it great? I can just remain with myself, stuffed up and horrible, and without fear.
Yeah.
Without fear, because Swami Dayananda says that we need two things with our emotional reactions. Well, don't fear it and welcome it.
Mm-hmm.
Don't fear it and welcome it. So you can come along and you wait, and then what happens is you keep, and then you place yourself in Ishvara's lap, and then Ishvara draws you to himself, and you find yourself being composed, free, and at home.
Yes.
Now what you've done is, does it mean that next moment you're going to have another problem? Of course you're going to, because of the practice of Karma Yoga. You're going to do this again and again. But the difference is, now this is the wonderful thing. So here I am, right here, right now as I am, I'm composed, I'm free, and I'm at home with myself. I've now neutralized that strong desire of I need to be liked by Prashant, or I need to be liked.
Yes.
And so what happens is, now I still might like to be liked, but he says it's teeth without fangs, snake without fangs. It's not that it's no longer, the desire is no longer determining how I see or how I act. Does that make sense? So it doesn't say it's gone. It just no longer determines how you see or how you act.
Yeah.
Now, this is where it's important. If I'm in pain, the pill becomes all important. Is that true?
Yeah.
If I've got a headache, the pill becomes important. I'm obsessed with the pill.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the same way we're obsessed with the world, because we think that we find experiences, it's gonna solve it for us psychologically.
Yeah.
Now, this is the reason why you see, this is why you can't go, okay, I no longer have to desire to be with God or anything, because I'm already consciousness. This is crazy, because it's very important to understand, when I'm in pain, then I can't help but have an appetite for God, can I? Because through the teaching, I know that that's where I'm going to find my solution. Why would I want to cut that out? This is where this is mad. So when the desire is neutralized, do you see what happens? The world becomes less attractive.
Yes.
So this is what they mean by dispassion. Without dispassion, you know how he says that Karma Yoga is to bring you back to yourself. Now this bringing you back to yourself is what he calls a contemplative disposition. In other words, when I'm disposed, inclined just to simply remain with myself as I am. Now, the problem is, this is incredibly boring. This is not exciting. This is peace. This is not excitement. This is not, there's no ego satisfaction in it. There's no ego dissatisfaction. That's why people are not interested in it, actually. Mm-hmm. But through becoming more and more dispassionate, we become more and more contemplative. Now, but contemplative doesn't mean some mystical, magical thing. It is this ability just to remain with myself as I am, and it's intimately connected with our understanding of God. Does that make sense?
That does.
It's intimately, this is what he calls it. He calls it a prayerful attitude. Do you know what he called a prayerful attitude? It's two things. Mm-hmm. It's the abiding in the understanding that everything is given, mm-hmm. and the awareness of the presence of the giver. Right? So this prayerful attitude, he said, it's not prayer, it's not praying. It's prayer. So the whole point with Karma Yoga is it's first of all the vision of what God is, and it's the living of that vision. So it's the Vedic vision, and it's the living of this vision. It results in the neutralization of binding desires, so the world becomes less and less attractive. So you're brought more back to being, to God, yes. To being able to be rooted in God. Does that make sense? Now, eventually, God is that which you come back to, right? Now, admittedly, I don't know what it means to, at this level, we come back to God, we come into relationship with Ishvara. Now, of course, there's another step, which is you go beyond relationship. You go into the what he termed the resolution of individuality and totality. Now, I don't know what that is. Frankly, I don't know what that is. You know, I don't deal with it. I only deal with the psychology. But the thing is that, but his psychology is not divorced from God. Can you see that?
Right.
There's no psychological transformation without the understanding of God.
Right.
There is none. I mean, even within our Western tradition, some of our saints, they somehow got onto this.
Yeah.
But they had no teaching tradition.
Yeah, the problem is they don't recognize the psyche is also part of the order.
That's the problem. Some did, but they didn't have a teaching order. They didn't make the distinction.
Right.
There's no one like Swami Dayananda. I have never met, I found spiritual people very difficult, particularly Western Indian spiritual people, because I found them a bit nutty. Do you know what I mean? But Swami Dayananda was unbelievably realistic. So, and he said that God is a fact to be appreciated.
Yes.
To be appreciated. In other words, to see the value of, without bringing God into our life. And he says the only way to bring Ishvara into your life is by being aware of him. So right here, right now as I am, if I go quiet and I let the presence of the given come in, that is being aware of him.
Right.
And I appreciate myself as a simple conscious person. So when we look at, and it's only through our understanding of God, can you see how without God we can't remain the same?
Yes.
It's just not, we're just chucked around. We're just, psychologically we're enslaved.
Yes.
And this isn't the absolute freedom, but he says we must appreciate in relative form the freedom, relatively speaking, before its absolute form can become available to us. So it's delusional to think that we can bypass Ishvara. It's just delusional. So have you got anything to?
This was actually extremely informative and very educational for me, because as always, I soak up a lot based on what you share and convey. And I like this theme that we are on at this point. And so, we spoke about understanding Ishvara and how, all of our psychological problems ultimately rest within this order, and recognition of that order is what brings rise to resolution. And so perhaps next time when we connect, would you be interested in a topic on how to build a stronger, firmer relationship with Ishvara?
Oh, absolutely, because I just had to, we would need to go into what the order is, because when Swami Dayananda says that we have choice over action only, there are sometimes disagreements about that. People have got this idea that my psychological reactions are a moral issue. Now, for Swami Dayananda, they were not. They are facts to be accepted. But the conduct is the moral issue.
Right.
So what we would go into next time, I think, is the understanding of how we can look at our mind,
right,
in such a way that doesn't bring about self-condemnation. Because for Swami Dayananda, remember, what he wanted to do was to show us how it means to be free while living.
Yeah.
If I'm engaged in self-condemnation, I can't be free while I'm living, because I'm hating myself, which is self-dissatisfaction. And human beings have a tendency not only, first of all, to hate themselves, but then they project that hatred and they hate others, because when they're hating others, they're defended against it. So if this fundamental problem that he talks about is not resolved, we live terribly.
Yeah.
We just live terribly. It's just a fact. Do you see what I mean? So what we'll do next time is we will go into how we look at our psychology without self-condemnation.
Okay.
Which is a very important, as you say, is an important thing.
Yeah, this would.
See what I mean?
That already.
Sorry?
I'm already looking forward to it.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Bede. This was extremely engaging once again, and thanks for driving these sessions. I mostly try to stay quiet and learn as much as I can, so appreciate the same.
No, I actually like you to talk, actually, so it's good. It's good. It's good. Okay.
Okay.
I'll just.
So I'll close off on a Shanti mantra. Om
Okay.
Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Hari Om Namaste. Thank you.
So turn your